The October rain hammered against the kitchen window as Mark Henderson stared at the eviction notice in his trembling hands. 48 hours. That's all he had left before losing the only home his 6-year-old daughter Emma had ever known. But what he didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, a desperate teenager would appear at his door, carrying not just her own tragedy, but the key to healing a wound that had been bleeding in Mark's heart for 3 long years before. We jump back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mark crumpled the notice and threw it across the cramped kitchen, watching it bounce off the refrigerator covered in Emma's crayon drawings. The apartment felt smaller than ever, with boxes stacked in corners, not for moving, but because he'd been selling everything he could just to keep the lights on. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a man who had once designed homes for wealthy families, couldn't afford to keep his own roof over his head. The construction industry had been brutal since the recession hit their small town of Millbrook, Ohio. What used to be a thriving community 40 minutes outside Cleveland had turned into a ghost town of foreclosed houses and shuttered businesses. Mark's architectural firm had folded 18 months ago, taking with it not just his career, but his confidence as a provider and father. He glanced at the clock, 5:30 p.m. Emma would be home from her after-school program soon, and he'd have to pretend everything was fine again. She'd already lost so much. Her mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident when Emma was 3, leaving Mark to navigate single parenthood while drowning in grief. Now, 3 years later, he was failing at the one thing Sarah had made him promise: keeping their daughter safe and secure. The front door burst open with the energy only a 6-year-old could muster. Emma bounded in, her backpack dragging behind her, blonde pigtails bouncing with each step. She looked so much like Sarah, it sometimes took Mark's breath away. "Daddy, guess what happened at school today?" Emma dropped her backpack and launched herself into Mark's arms. For a moment, the weight of their problems lifted as he held his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Tell me everything, sweetheart." Emma launched into an animated story about how she'd helped the class hamster Mr. Whiskers escape from his cage during math time. Mark found himself genuinely laughing for the first time in weeks, marveling at how his daughter could find joy in the smallest moments despite everything they'd been through. As Emma chatted away about her day, Mark's eyes drifted to the eviction notice on the floor. Tomorrow, he'd have to start making calls. To his sister in California, maybe, though they'd never been close. Or perhaps his old college roommate in Denver. Anyone who might let them crash until he could figure something out. The thought of uprooting Emma from the only home she remembered made his stomach churn. "Daddy, you're not listening," Emma said, tugging on his sleeve. "Sorry, baby, I'm listening now." "I said I'm hungry. Can we make pancakes for dinner?" Mark smiled despite himself. Pancakes for dinner had become their tradition when money was tight, cheap, filling, and it made Emma feel like they were breaking rules together. "Absolutely. But first, let me check what we have." Opening the nearly empty refrigerator, Mark did a quick inventory. 1 egg, half a container of milk that might last another day, and the emergency $20 bill he'd hidden behind the condiment bottles. Tomorrow was grocery day, but there wouldn't be a tomorrow in this apartment. As Emma set the table with mismatched plates and plastic forks, Mark mixed the batter with practiced efficiency. These simple moments had become precious to him. The sound of Emma humming off-key, the warmth of the kitchen light against the dreary evening, the illusion that they were just a normal family having a normal dinner. "Daddy, why do you look sad sometimes?" Emma asked suddenly, her 6-year-old intuition cutting through his carefully constructed facade. Mark paused, spatula halfway to the pan. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Sometimes you get this look, like when you're thinking about Mommy, but different. Like you're worried about something, The honesty in her voice nearly broke him. Sarah had always said Emma was an old soul, wise beyond her years. At 6, she was already reading chapter books and asking questions that made Mark realize how much. She understood about their situation. Sometimes grown-ups have things they need to figure out, Mark said carefully, flipping the first pancake. But you don't need to worry about that. That's my job. But if you're worried, and I'm worried about you being worried, then we're both worried, Emma said, with the kind of logic that only made sense coming from a child. Mark laughed, genuine and surprised. You know what? You're absolutely right. How about this? I promise to try not to worry so much if you promise to keep being the amazing kid you are. Deal? Emma grinned, and for a moment Mark could almost believe they'd find a way through this. They ate their pancakes by candlelight, not for ambience, but because Mark had been rationing electricity. Emma thought it was romantic, like in the movies, and Mark didn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. She chatted about her friends at school, her teacher Mrs. Patterson, and her plans for Halloween, which was still 3 weeks away. I want to be an architect like you, Daddy, she said, syrup dripping down her chin. An architect, Mark corrected gently, though his heart clenched at her words. Yeah, I want to draw houses and make them real, just like you used to do. Used to do. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark had shown Emma his old blueprints once, spread across their dining table, explaining how each line represented a wall, a door, a window. She'd been fascinated, tracing the drawings with her tiny finger and asking endless questions about how houses were built. Maybe someday we can design a house together, Mark said, meaning it, with a big backyard for a dog, definitely a big backyard, and a room just for art supplies. The biggest art room you've ever seen. Emma's eyes lit up with the possibility, and Mark felt a familiar stab of guilt. Here he was, making promises he couldn't keep to a child who'd already lost too much. But in that moment, seeing her happiness, he couldn't bring himself to be realistic. Sometimes hope was all they had. After dinner, they settled onto the couch for their nightly routine, a chapter from whatever book they were reading together. Tonight it was Charlotte's Web, and Emma was deeply invested in Wilbur's fate. As Mark read about friendship and sacrifice, he couldn't help but think about his own situation. Like Wilbur, he felt helpless, dependent on the kindness of others for survival. Daddy, do you think Charlotte is really going to save Wilbur? Emma asked, snuggled against his side. I think Charlotte cares about Wilbur very much, and when someone cares about you that much, they'll do everything they can to help, like how you take care of me. Exactly like that. Emma fell asleep during the 3rd chapter, her head heavy against Mark's shoulder. He carried her to her small bedroom, decorated with drawings she'd made, and a few stuffed animals that had survived. Their recent purge of belongings. Tucking her under the covers, Mark kissed her forehead and whispered the same words he'd said every night since Sarah died. Sweet dreams, baby girl. Daddy loves you. Standing in the doorway of Emma's room, Mark allowed himself a moment to really look at their situation. The peeling wallpaper, the carpet worn thin in spots, the window that never quite closed properly. This wasn't the life he'd planned for his daughter, but it had been their life, and tomorrow it would be gone. He spent the next few hours on his laptop, researching homeless shelters and temporary housing programs. The options were grim. Most had waiting lists, and the few available spots were in facilities that separated men and children. The thought of being apart from Emma, even temporarily, was unbearable. Around midnight, Mark finally closed the laptop and rubbed his tired eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight he was still Emma's father, still her protector, still the one person in the world she could count on completely. That had to be enough. He made one final check on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully, her small hand clutched around a stuffed elephant Sarah had given her. The sight filled Mark with both love and determination. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let his daughter down. He couldn't let Sarah down. The rain had stopped, leaving the night quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Mark stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the narrow alley behind their building where he'd often seen homeless individuals seeking shelter. Soon, he thought grimly, he might know exactly how they felt. But as he prepared for what might be their last night in the only home Emma had ever known, Mark couldn't imagine that in less than 18 hours everything would change in a way he never could have predicted. A scared teenager with her own desperate story would appear at his door, setting in motion events that would transform both their lives in ways neither could foresee. The morning came too soon, grey and cold like Mark's mood. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and running through impossible scenarios in his head. By 6 a.m., he was already dressed and making coffee with the last of their grounds, trying to summon the energy to face what would likely be the worst day of his and Emma's lives. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Daddy. Are we having cereal today?" Mark's heart sank. They were out of cereal, out of milk, out of almost everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The $20 bill would have to stretch for Emma's lunch money and maybe a few items to get them through their final day in the apartment. How about toast instead? We can make it special with cinnamon. Okay. Emma's easy acceptance of the change reminded Mark why he fought so hard to shield her from their reality. At 6, she trusted him completely to take care of everything, a faith that both motivated and terrified him. While Emma ate her cinnamon toast, Mark's phone buzzed with a text from his landlord, Jerry Kovac. The message was short and unsympathetic. "Sheriff's office will be there at 3 p.m. tomorrow if rent isn't paid in full by end of business today. No exceptions." Mark stared at the message, feeling the walls of their small kitchen closing in around him. $1,800. He might as well have been asking for $18,000. His bank account showed a balance of $43.67, barely enough for gas and Emma's school lunch for the week. After dropping Emma at school, Mark drove his aging Honda Civic to every construction site within 30 miles, begging for work. The responses were all variations of the same theme. Business was slow, they weren't hiring, maybe try again in the spring. At the 4th site, a foreman named Pete Williams took pity on him. "Look, man, I got nothing permanent, but I need someone to help demo an old house tomorrow. Cash job, probably take 2 days. $150 total, but it's hard, dirty work." Mark nearly laughed at the irony. $150 wouldn't even dent their rent, but it was something. "I'll take it." "You sure this ain't design work? We're talking sledgehammers and hauling debris." "I'm sure." Pete studied Mark's face, seeing something there that made him nod. "All right. Meet me at 412 Elm Street tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. Bring work gloves if you got 'em." Driving home, Mark tried to calculate their options. The demolition money would buy them maybe a week in a cheap motel, but that was just delaying the inevitable. He needed a miracle, and miracles seemed to be in short supply in Millbrook. The afternoon brought more disappointment. 2 potential leads for freelance drafting work fell through when the clients learned he no longer had an office or professional references. His sister in California didn't answer her phone, and his college roommate's number had been disconnected. By the time Mark picked up Emma from school, he'd resigned himself to the inevitable. Tonight, he'd have to tell her they were moving, though he still didn't know where they'd be moving to. Emma was unusually quiet during the drive home, staring out the window at the passing houses. Finally, she spoke up. "Daddy, Jessica's mom said we might be moving away." Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Jessica was Emma's best friend, and apparently the school gossip network extended to the parents. What made her say that? She heard her mom talking on the phone about how the Henderson family was having money troubles. Emma's voice was small, careful. Are we having money troubles, Daddy? Mark pulled into their apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, engine running. He could lie, deflect, make up another story to protect Emma's innocence, but something in her voice told him she already knew more than she was letting on. Yes, sweetheart, we are having some money troubles. Emma nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected all along. Is that why we eat pancakes for dinner sometimes? And why we don't turn on all the lights anymore? The question hit Mark like a physical blow. His 6-year-old daughter had been watching, learning, understanding far more than he'd given her credit for. Yes, that's part of it. Are we going to be okay? Mark turned to look at his daughter, her serious brown eyes so much like Sarah's, waiting for an answer he didn't have. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, Em, but I promise you, no matter what, we're going to stick together. And I'm going to keep you safe. Emma reached over and patted his arm with her small hand. It's okay, Daddy. We'll figure it out. We're a good team. The simple faith in her words nearly broke him. Mark pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as she wrapped her thin arms around his neck. Yes, we are, the best team. That evening, Mark began the heartbreaking process of sorting through their belongings, deciding what they could carry and what would have to be left behind. Emma helped, approaching the task with the matter-of-fact efficiency that seemed to be her superpower. We should definitely keep this, she said, holding up a framed photo of the three of them from Emma's 4th birthday, the last photo they'd taken as a complete family before Sarah's accident. Absolutely, Mark agreed, wrapping it carefully in one of Emma's sweaters. They worked together, creating piles of essentials, maybes, and things they'd have to abandon. Mark's architectural books went in the maybe pile. They were too heavy to carry, but too valuable to his identity to easily discard. Emma's stuffed animals were ruthlessly sorted, with only the elephant and a small bear making the cut. Around 8 o'clock, there was a soft knock at the door. Mark frowned, not expecting anyone. Through the peephole, he saw a slight figure huddled in an oversized hoodie, barely visible in the dim hallway light. "Can I help you?" Mark called through the door. "Please," came a voice, young and scared. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw your lights on and I need help." Mark's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Emma was right behind him, curious about the visitor. "Emma, go to your room for a minute, okay?" "But Daddy, please, sweetheart, I need to see who this is first." Emma reluctantly retreated, though Mark could tell she was listening from the hallway. He opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latch engaged. Standing in the hallway was a girl who couldn't have been more than 17, visibly pregnant and soaked from the light rain that had started again. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around a face that showed exhaustion, fear, and something else. Desperation. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, seeing Mark's hesitation. "I know this is weird, but I've been walking around for hours, and I saw your light and you have a kid, so I thought maybe you'd understand." Mark studied her face, seeing something that reminded him of Emma when she'd had nightmares after Sarah's death. That look of a child trying to be brave when the world had become too scary to handle alone. "What's your name?" Mark asked gently. "Riley Chen." She shifted uncomfortably, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "I'm 17, and I don't have anywhere to go." Mark glanced back toward Emma's room, then at Riley's face. Every parental instinct told him to be cautious, to protect his daughter from unknown situations. But another part of him, the part that remembered what it felt like to be desperate and alone, recognized something in this girl's eyes. "How long have you been walking around?" "Since yesterday morning. I slept in the park last night, but it's getting cold and Riley's voice broke slightly. "I'm 5 months pregnant and I haven't eaten anything since yesterday." Mark made a decision that would change everything. He unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. "Come in. You look like you're about to collapse." Riley stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto their worn carpet. She was thin everywhere except for her belly, and Mark could see she'd been living rough for more than just a day or two. Her clothes were wrinkled and dirty, her sneakers had holes, and she carried a small backpack that looked like it contained everything she owned. "Emma," Mark called softly, "you can come out now." Emma appeared immediately, her eyes wide with curiosity as she took in their unexpected visitor. "Hi," she said with the fearless friendliness that only children possessed. "I'm Emma. Are you okay? You look sad." Riley managed a small smile, the first genuine expression Mark had seen from her. "Hi, Emma. I'm Riley. And yeah, I'm a little sad right now, but meeting you is making me feel better." Mark watched the interaction, seeing how Riley's entire demeanor softened when she looked at Emma. There was something about the girl that seemed genuine, despite the circumstances. "Are you hungry?" Emma asked. "We don't have much food, but Daddy makes really good pancakes." Mark found himself smiling despite the surreal situation. "Emma's right. It's not much. But you're welcome to share what we have." Riley's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to take your food. You don't even know me. Right now, you're someone who needs help," Mark said simply, "and we know what that feels like." As Mark prepared another batch of pancakes, Riley sat at their small table with Emma, who chatted away about school, her friends, and her plans to be an architect like her daddy. Mark noticed how Riley listened intently, asking questions and genuinely engaging with Emma's stories. "So you're going to have a baby?" Emma asked with typical 6-year-old directness. "Yes, in about 4 months. That's exciting. Is it a boy or a girl?" "I don't know yet. I haven't been able to... I want it to be a surprise." Mark caught the hesitation in Riley's voice and suspected the truth was more complicated than she was letting on. As they ate together, he found himself studying this girl who'd appeared at their door on the worst day of his life. There was a story there, obviously, but he also sensed that she was running from something more than just homelessness. "Riley," Mark said carefully, "I have to ask, are you in some kind of trouble? Is someone looking for you?" Riley's fork paused, halfway to her mouth. "It's complicated. Are you safe? Are you and the baby safe? Now, yes. Here, yes." Riley met his eyes directly. "I'm not a criminal or anything like that. I made some choices that put me in a bad situation, and I had to leave." Emma, who had been following the conversation with intense interest, suddenly stood up. "Riley, do you want to see my room? I have books and some toys, and maybe you'd like to rest." The offer was so innocent, so naturally generous, that both adults looked at her with amazement. Here was a 6-year-old who understood instinctively that their guest needed comfort and kindness. "I'd love to see your room," Riley said, her voice thick with emotion. As Emma led Riley down the hallway, chattering about her stuffed animals and her favorite books, Mark stood in the kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. 24 hours ago, his biggest problem had been the eviction notice. Now he had a homeless pregnant teenager in his apartment. His daughter was already bonding with her, and somehow the desperateness of his own situation seemed to have shifted into something else entirely. He could hear Emma's voice from the bedroom, explaining the significance of each drawing on her walls, followed by Riley's gentle responses and questions. There was something about the sound of their conversation that reminded Mark of the way Emma used to talk to Sarah, open and trusting and full of natural affection. When they returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, Emma had clearly made a decision. "Daddy, Riley is really tired and it's raining outside. Can she stay here tonight? She can sleep in my room with me." Mark looked at Riley, who was clearly exhausted but trying not to impose. "I don't want to cause any problems," she said quickly. "I can find somewhere else." "No," Mark interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Emma's right. You need to rest, And it's not safe for you to be wandering around in the rain, especially—" He gestured toward her belly. "But I don't have any money to pay you, and I can't—" "We're not asking for money," Mark said. "Right now, we're just asking you to be safe." Riley's composure finally cracked, and she began to cry, quiet, grateful tears that spoke of relief and exhaustion and fear, all mixed together. Emma immediately went to her side, patting her arm the same way she'd comforted Mark in the car earlier. "It's okay," Emma said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups cry too. Daddy cries sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking." Mark felt his cheeks flush, but Riley managed a watery laugh. "Your daddy sounds like a good man. He's the best daddy in the whole world," Emma said with absolute conviction. As they settled in for the evening, Mark couldn't help but think about the strange turn his life had taken. Tomorrow, he'd still have to face the sheriff's office, still have to tell them they couldn't make rent. But tonight, his small apartment felt less empty, less desperate. There was something about helping someone else that had shifted his perspective, made him feel useful in a way he hadn't experienced in months. Riley curled up on the couch with borrowed blankets and one of Emma's extra pillows, finally looking peaceful for the first time since her arrival. Emma had insisted on giving her the stuffed elephant for the night, a gesture that reminded Mark of Sarah's generous heart. Standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, Mark watched Riley's breathing slow as she fell into what looked like the first real sleep she'd had in days. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they'd all found something they didn't know they were looking for. Riley had found safety, Emma had found someone to care for, and Mark had found a purpose beyond his own problems. He had no idea that this moment marked the beginning of a journey that would transform all their lives in ways none of them could imagine. Mark woke at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of quiet sobbing from the living room. He lay still for a moment, disoriented, before remembering Riley sleeping on their couch. The crying was muffled, as if she was trying not to wake anyone, but the raw pain in it made Mark's chest tighten. He slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the kitchen, where he could see Riley's silhouette curled on the couch, her shoulders shaking. She was awake, staring at the wall, tears streaming down her face in the dim pre-dawn light. "Riley." Mark's voice was gentle. "Are you okay?" She startled, quickly wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. I was trying to be quiet. You didn't wake me." Mark moved closer, noting how small she looked wrapped in Emma's blankets. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" "No, it's not that." Riley sat up slowly, her hand automatically moving to her belly. I was thinking about what happens next. I can't stay here forever, and I don't know where else to go." Mark sat down in the armchair across from her, studying her face in the growing light. "Riley, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She tensed, clearly expecting judgment or an ultimatum. "Are you running from someone who hurt you?" Riley was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in the fabric of the blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My stepfather, when he found out I was pregnant, he said terrible things, called me names, said I was a disgrace to the family. What about your mother?" "She chose him." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Mark could hear the deep hurt underneath. "When I told her what he'd been saying, how he'd been treating me, she said maybe I should consider giving the baby up and moving out until things calmed down." Mark felt a familiar surge of protective anger, the same feeling he'd had whenever someone threatened Emma's well-being. "So, you left." "I took what I could carry and left 3 weeks ago. I've been staying with friends, but nobody can keep me long-term. Most of their parents don't want a pregnant teenager in their house." Riley looked up at Mark with eyes that held too much knowledge for 17. "I know this is crazy, showing up at a stranger's door, but I saw Emma through the window yesterday, and you looked like a real father. Not like the men my mom usually brings home. The honesty in her words hit Mark unexpectedly. Here was a girl barely out of childhood herself, carrying a baby and completely alone in the world. Yet she'd somehow maintained enough hope to seek help from strangers. "The baby's father?" Mark asked carefully. Riley's face hardened slightly. "He's 18, a senior at my school. When I told him, he said it wasn't his problem and I should take care of it. Then he started telling people I was lying about him being the father." She shook her head bitterly. Turns out he'd been saying the same thing to 2 other girls. Mark processed this information, understanding more clearly why Riley had seemed so desperate the night before. She wasn't just homeless, she was completely abandoned by everyone who should have protected her. "I know you have your own problems," Riley continued quickly. "Emma mentioned something about you guys maybe moving. I don't want to make things harder for you." Before Mark could respond, Emma's voice piped up from the hallway. "Daddy, is everything okay?" Mark turned to see his daughter standing in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, looking between him and Riley with concern. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We were just talking." Emma padded over to the couch and climbed up next to Riley without hesitation. "You were crying, weren't you? I could tell because your eyes are red." Riley managed a small smile. "You're very observant." "Daddy says I get that from my mommy. She used to notice when people were sad too." Emma studied Riley's face with the intense focus only children could manage. "Are you sad because you don't have a mommy and daddy to take care of you?" The question was so direct, so compassionate, that Riley's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Something like that. Well, you have us now," Emma said with the simple certainty that made Mark's heart ache. "Right, Daddy?" Mark looked at his daughter, then at Riley, and felt something shift inside him. Yesterday, his biggest concern had been his own family's survival. But looking at these two, his brave, generous daughter and this frightened girl, who'd been failed by every adult in her life, he realized that sometimes the solution to your own problems came disguised as someone else's needs. "Right," Mark said firmly. "You have us now." Over breakfast, scrambled eggs made with the last of their food, Mark found himself learning more about Riley's situation. She'd been an honor student before the pregnancy, planning to go to college, on an academic scholarship. She'd worked part-time at a local bookstore to save money, had volunteered at the animal shelter, had been what anyone would consider a responsible teenager. "I wasn't stupid," Riley said, as if reading Mark's thoughts. "I knew about protection and all that, but Jamie kept saying it would be fine, that he'd pull out, and I trusted him." Emma listened to this conversation with the serious attention she gave to all adult topics she didn't fully understand, but sensed were important. "Riley, do you know if your baby is a boy or a girl?" "I don't know yet. I haven't been able to afford to find out." "I think it's going to be a girl," Emma announced confidently, "and she's going to be really smart, like you, and really pretty too." Riley smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Mark had seen from her. "What makes you think it's a girl?" "I just have a feeling. Daddy says feelings are important, especially about babies." After breakfast, while Emma got ready for school, Mark made a decision that surprised even him. "Riley, I have to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer." She looked up from where she was folding the borrowed blankets, clearly expecting him to ask her to leave. "I have a job today, demolition work. It's not much money, but it's something. Tonight, I'm going to have to tell Emma that we're being evicted from this apartment." Riley's face fell. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize—" "Let me finish," Mark interrupted gently. "Here's the thing. I've been trying to figure out how to tell my 6-year-old daughter that we might be homeless, that I've failed as her father, that I can't provide the stability she needs." Riley waited, sensing there was more. "But last night, watching Emma with you, seeing how she immediately wanted to take care of you. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Sometimes the best way to solve your own problems is to focus on solving someone else's. I don't understand. Mark sat down across from her, his mind working through an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. There's a small shed behind this building. It's not much, just a storage space the landlord uses for maintenance equipment, but it's dry, it has electricity, and it's got a space heater. Riley's eyes widened as she began to understand where this was going. I can't offer you much, but I can offer you that. A roof over your head, access to our bathroom and kitchen when you need it, and... Mark paused, knowing he was about to commit to something that would change all their lives, and help figuring out what comes next for all of us. But you're being evicted. How can you... I'm being evicted from the apartment. The shed isn't part of the rental agreement. Technically, it's just storage space that the landlord probably forgot exists. Mark felt a spark of the strategic thinking that had made him a good architect. It's not ideal, but it's shelter. And maybe, between the three of us, we can figure out something better. Riley stared at him in disbelief. You barely know me. Why would you risk anything to help me? Mark thought about how to explain something. He barely understood himself. Yesterday, I felt like the biggest failure in the world. I couldn't provide for my daughter, couldn't keep a roof over her head, couldn't be the father she deserved. But last night, watching Emma share her dinner with you, seeing her give you her stuffed elephant, I remembered something Sarah used to say. Your wife? She used to say that the best way to find your purpose was to look for someone who needed what you had to give, even if what you had didn't seem like much. Mark's voice grew stronger as he spoke. I may not have money or a stable home to offer, but I have experience being a parent. I know what it's like to be scared and alone with a child to protect. Maybe that's something you need right now. Riley was crying again, but these were different tears, relief mixed with disbelief and hope. I can't pay you anything. You can. Help with Emma when I'm working. You can be another adult who cares about her well-being. And maybe, between your retail experience and my construction skills, we can figure out how to build something better for all of us. Emma appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for school. She looked between the two, adults, and immediately sensed the emotional weight in the room. Is Riley going to stay with us? She asked directly. If she wants to, Mark replied. Emma walked over to Riley and hugged her with the fierce affection she usually reserved for Mark. I want you to stay. We're a good team, and teams stick together. Riley hugged Emma back, her voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. After dropping Emma at school, Mark showed Riley the shed. It was small, probably 8 by 10 feet, with a concrete floor and wooden walls. It was clean but basic, exactly what Mark had described. Riley walked around the space, evaluating it with the practical eye of someone who'd been sleeping in parks and on friends' couches. The space heater works? She asked. Yeah, and there's an outlet for anything else you might need. It's not luxurious, but... It's perfect, Riley interrupted, and Mark could tell she meant it. It's warm and dry and private. I haven't had privacy in 3 weeks. They spent the morning moving Riley's few belongings into the shed and setting up a basic living space with items Mark could spare from the apartment. An air mattress, some bedding, a small lamp, and a folding chair transformed the storage space into something that could pass for temporary housing. There's one rule, Mark said as they finished arranging things. You don't stay out here if you don't feel safe or if you need anything. Day or night, you knock on the apartment door. Emma and I want to know you're okay. Riley nodded, clearly, moved by the kindness. Mark, why are you doing this, really? Mark considered the question seriously. Because 3 weeks ago, you made a choice to protect your baby by leaving an unsafe situation. That took courage. Because yesterday you asked for help instead of giving up. That took hope. And because Emma sees something in you that reminds Me of her mother, someone who deserves to be protected and cared for. What if I disappoint you? What if I can't be the person you think I am? Then we'll figure it out together, Mark said simply. That's what families do. As Mark prepared to leave for his demolition job, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose beyond his own survival. Yes, their situation was still precarious. Yes, they were still being evicted. But somehow the act of helping Riley had shifted his perspective from desperation to determination. Riley walked him to his car, moving carefully in the morning cold. I'll be here when Emma gets home from school. I can help her with homework or just keep her company until you get back. You don't have to. I want to, Riley said firmly. For the first time in weeks, I feel useful. Let me help. As Mark drove toward the demolition site, he caught sight of Riley in his rearview mirror, standing in front of their apartment building, one hand on her belly, looking more hopeful than she had since her arrival. The sight filled him with a strange combination of protectiveness and determination. At the job site, Pete Williams took one look at Mark's face and nodded approvingly. You look different today. More focused. I've got something to work for, Mark replied, picking up a sledgehammer with renewed energy. Family? Something like that. As Mark swung the hammer against the old plaster walls, each blow felt like he was breaking down more than just building materials. He was demolishing his old mindset of defeat and victimhood, making room for something new to be built. The physical labor felt good, cleansing, purposeful in a way his job searches hadn't. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It took him a moment to realize it was Riley. She must have gotten his number from the emergency. Contact list on the refrigerator. Emma got home safe. She's showing me her homework and teaching me to make mac and cheese from a box. Thank you for trusting me with her. Mark smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead. For the first time in months, he wasn't worried about Emma's after-school hours. She was with someone who cared about her, someone who understood what it meant to need protection and kindness. The afternoon flew by as Mark lost himself in the physical work, each swing of the hammer bringing them closer to the $150 that would buy them a few more days to figure things out. But more importantly, it was buying them time to help Riley get back on her feet, time for the three of them to become the unconventional family they were clearly becoming. As quitting time approached, Pete handed Mark his cash payment and studied. His face again. You know, I might have some more work next week. Nothing permanent, but steady for a while. You interested? Absolutely. Good. You work hard, and you don't complain. That's rare these days. Driving home, Mark felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. They still had huge challenges ahead. The eviction, finding permanent housing, figuring out Riley's medical care and future plans. But they also had something they hadn't had 24 hours ago. They had each other, and they had hope. As he pulled into the apartment complex, Mark could see warm light glowing from their kitchen window and two figures moving around inside. His daughter and the pregnant teenager they'd taken in were making dinner together, creating the kind of domestic scene he'd missed since Sarah died. Walking up the stairs to their apartment, Mark realized that sometimes the biggest changes in life came disguised as the smallest acts of kindness. Yesterday, opening his door to a scared teenager had seemed like a simple humanitarian gesture. Today, it felt like the first step toward rebuilding not just their living situation, but their sense of family and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were all home. 3 weeks had passed since Riley moved into the shed, and their unusual living arrangement had settled into something that almost felt normal. Mark's demolition work had stretched into a steady gig with Pete's crew, providing just enough income to keep them fed and to slowly save toward a deposit on a new place. The eviction had gone through as expected, but the landlord, Jerry Kovac, had been surprisingly understanding about their situation. "Look," Jerry had said when he found Mark cleaning out the apartment. "I got to follow the law about the eviction, but I ain't heartless. You been good tenants otherwise. Long as you keep the place clean and don't cause trouble, I don't see no reason to mention that storage shed to nobody." It was the closest thing to a miracle Mark had experienced in months, and he'd accepted the gift gratefully. They were technically homeless, but they weren't on the streets. Riley had transformed the small shed into something cozy with borrowed furniture and decorations Emma had made. More importantly, she'd transformed their daily routine into something that worked for all three of them. Riley picked Emma up from school each day, helped with homework, and had dinner started by the time Mark got home from work. In return, Mark drove Riley to her medical appointments and helped her navigate the maze of social services and pregnancy resources available in their county. Emma, for her part, had embraced her role as big sister to both Riley and the unborn baby with enthusiasm that surprised the adults. "I think the baby moved," Emma announced excitedly one evening, her small hand pressed against Riley's growing belly. They were sitting on the living room floor of what had been their apartment, now completely empty except for sleeping bags and a few camp chairs. The new tenants wouldn't move in for another week, giving them a grace period to use the space. Riley smiled, placing her hand over Emma's. "She's definitely getting stronger. Dr. Martinez says that's normal for 6 months. She?" Mark looked up from the job listings he'd been browsing on his phone. "Did you find out?" "Yesterday at the appointment. I wanted to wait to tell you guys." "Together?" Riley's face glowed with excitement she'd been trying to contain. "It's a girl, due in mid-February." Emma squealed with delight, bouncing on her knees. "I knew it. I knew it was going to be a girl. Now I can really start planning." "Planning what?" Mark asked, though he had a feeling he already knew. "Everything. Her room in our new house, what toys she'll need, how I'm going to teach her to read." "Emma," Mark interrupted gently, "Riley hasn't decided what she wants to do yet about living arrangements. After the baby comes, she might want to—" "No," Riley said firmly, surprising them both. "I mean, if you'll have us, I'd like to stay. You two are the only real family I've had in years." Mark felt something warm settle in his chest at her words. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd watched Riley blossom from a scared, desperate teenager into someone who laughed at Emma's jokes, helped with household tasks without being asked, and brought a sense of stability to their chaotic situation that he hadn't realized they'd been missing. "Of course we want you to stay," Mark said. "We're just going to need a bigger place." This had been the challenge occupying Mark's thoughts for days. His construction work was steady but not well-paying, and finding a landlord willing to rent to an unconventional family with spotty employment history was proving difficult. Most places required first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit, a financial mountain that seemed impossible to climb. Riley had been researching their options too, spending hours at the public library using the computers to look into assistance programs, job opportunities, and housing resources. "I found something today that might help," she said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "There's a program called Second Chance Housing that helps families in transition. They have a few properties in Millbrook, and they work with people who have employment but need help with move-in costs." Mark took the paper, scanning the information. "Did you call them?" "I wanted to talk to you first." The application asks for references and employment verification, but it also asks about household composition. I wasn't sure how to explain our situation. It was a valid concern. How did you explain that you were a widowed father, a homeless, pregnant teenager, and a 6-year-old who'd somehow become the emotional glue holding everyone together? Most social service programs weren't designed for their particular combination of circumstances. "We tell the truth," Mark decided. "We're a family. Maybe not a traditional one, but a family nonetheless." Emma nodded sagely, as if this settled the matter completely. Families come in all different shapes. That's what Mrs. Patterson taught us in school. The next morning, Mark called Second Chance Housing while Riley took Emma to school. The intake coordinator, a woman named Linda Foster, listened to their story with surprising openness. "So you're applying as a household of 3? Yourself, your daughter, and Ms. Chen?" "Yes." "Riley is... well, she's become part of our family. We're committed to staying together and supporting each other. And Ms. Chen is pregnant." 6 months. Along. She's been excellent with Emma, and we're planning for the baby together. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Henderson, I have to ask, is this a romantic relationship?" Mark blinked, not having considered that anyone might interpret their arrangement that way. "No, absolutely not. Riley is 17. This is purely a supportive family situation. I'm more like a guardian or older brother figure." "I see. Well, that actually makes this more straightforward from a legal standpoint. We do occasionally work with extended family situations and guardianship arrangements. Can you come in this afternoon for an interview?" By the time Riley and Emma returned from school, Mark had scheduled their appointment and spent the morning calling references and gathering paperwork. Pete Williams had agreed to provide employment verification, and even Jerry Kovac had offered to give them a positive reference despite the eviction. "I feel like we're applying for college or something," Riley said nervously as they prepared for the interview. She'd borrowed a dress from one of her former classmates and looked younger than her 17 years, but more mature than most adults Mark knew. "Just be yourself," Mark advised. "Tell them about your plans, your goals. Show them that you're someone worth investing in." The Second Chance Housing office was located in a converted house near downtown Millbrook, with a warm, welcoming atmosphere that immediately put them at ease. Linda Foster turned out to be a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes, who'd clearly seen every possible family configuration in her years of social work. "So tell me about how this arrangement came about," Linda said once they were seated in her office, Emma coloring quietly in a chair nearby. Mark and Riley took turns explaining their story. The eviction, Riley's appearance at their door, the decision to help each other through their respective crises. Linda listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. "Riley, what are your long-term goals?" Linda asked. "I want to finish high school first. I'm doing independent. Study now to stay on track for graduation in June. After that, I'd like to go to community college for early childhood education. I've always loved working with kids, and these past few weeks with Emma have shown me that I'm good at it." "And how do you see your role in this family unit?" Riley glanced at Mark and Emma before answering. "I help with childcare and household management while Mark works. In return, he's helping me navigate pregnancy and prepare for parenthood. We're like roommates, but closer, like siblings who chose each other." Linda nodded approvingly. "Mark, how do you see this working financially once the baby arrives?" "I'm hoping to transition from day labor to more steady construction work. My goal is to eventually restart my architectural practice, maybe focusing on affordable housing, design. Riley will be able to work part-time once the baby's older, and we'll share childcare responsibilities." "Emma," Linda said, turning to the 6-year-old who'd been listening intently while coloring, "how do you feel about Riley and the baby living with you and your dad?" Emma looked up with the serious expression she wore when adults asked her important questions. "I like having Riley there. She helps me with homework and teaches me about the baby. And when Daddy has to work late, I'm not scared because Riley's there." "Are you excited about the baby?" "Very excited. I'm going to teach her everything I know about being a kid. And Daddy's going to teach her about building things. And Riley's going to teach her about books." Linda smiled, making a note in their file. "It sounds like you've all thought this through carefully. I have to tell you, this is one of the more unusual applications we've received, but also one of the most thoughtful. She explained the program requirements. Monthly rent would be based on Mark's income. They'd need to participate in financial counseling, and Riley would need to connect with prenatal care and parenting resources. In exchange, they'd get help with move-in costs and access to a 2-bedroom apartment in one of the program's properties. "There's one unit available now," Linda said, consulting her computer. "It's in a small complex about 10 minutes from Emma's. School, with a playground and laundry facilities on site. Would you like to see it?" 20 minutes later, they were standing in what could be their new home, a modest but clean 2-bedroom apartment with a small kitchen, living room, and even a tiny balcony overlooking the playground. Emma immediately claimed the smaller bedroom, announcing that Riley and the baby could have the bigger one. "It's perfect," Riley breathed, walking through the rooms with wonder. After weeks in the shed, the space seemed luxurious. Mark found himself imagining their future here. Emma doing homework at the kitchen table while Riley prepared dinner, the sound of a baby crying and laughing filling the rooms, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations in the living room. For the first time since Sarah's death, he could picture a future that felt stable and happy. "We'll take it," he told Linda without hesitation. The paperwork took another hour, but by late afternoon they had keys to their new home and a move-in date of the following weekend. Walking back to their car, Emma skipped between Mark and Riley, chattering excitedly about decorating plans and where they'd put the baby's crib. "I can't believe this is really happening," Riley said quietly to Mark, as Emma ran ahead to explore the playground. "Believe it. We did this together, all 3 of us." That evening they celebrated with pizza delivery to their empty apartment, sitting on sleeping bags and planning their new life. Riley had started a list of things they'd need for the baby, while Emma drew pictures of their future bedroom arrangements. Mark watched them collaborate with the easy familiarity they'd developed over the past weeks and felt grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "I have something to tell you guys," Riley said as they finished eating. "I heard back from the high school today about my independent study progress." Mark and Emma looked at her expectantly. "If I keep up my current pace, I'll graduate 2 weeks early, which means I'll finish before the baby's born." Emma clapped excitedly. "That's amazing! Are you going to have a graduation ceremony?" "A small one, just for independent study students. But," Riley looked at Mark hopefully, "would you guys come? I know it's not a big deal, but—" "Are you kidding?" Mark interrupted. "Of course we'll be there. We wouldn't miss it. I'll make you a graduation card," Emma announced, "with sparkles and everything." Riley's eyes filled with happy tears. "I've never had anyone come to something like that for me before." "Well, you do now," Mark said simply. They settled in for their last night in the apartment-turned-crash pad. Mark reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just 3 weeks. They'd gone from individual survival mode to functioning as a unit, each member contributing something essential to their collective well-being. Emma had gained a big sister figure and the excitement of preparing for a baby. Riley had found safety, support, and a path forward for her education and future. And Mark had rediscovered his sense of purpose as a protector and provider, not just for Emma, but for their chosen family. "Daddy!" Emma's sleepy voice came from her sleeping bag between Mark and Riley. "Are we going to be okay now?" Mark looked across his daughter at Riley, who was gently rubbing her belly where the baby was moving, and felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay." Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, covering their small corner of Millbrook in pristine white. Inside their temporary shelter, 3 people who'd found each other in their darkest moments slept peacefully, dreaming of the future they were building together, but none of them could have imagined that their greatest test was still ahead, or that the bonds they'd formed would soon be challenged in ways that would either break them apart or forge them into something unbreakable. Moving day arrived with an unexpected snowstorm that turned their 10-minute drive into a careful 45-minute journey through Millbrook's slush-covered streets. Mark gripped the steering wheel of their borrowed pickup truck. Pete had generously offered his vehicle for the move, while Riley sat beside him, nervously checking her phone for updates from Emma's school about early dismissal. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Riley said for the third time that morning, watching the windshield wipers battle the heavy, wet snow. "Getting nervous?" Mark asked, though he could understand the feeling. After weeks of uncertainty, the prospect of having a real home again felt almost too good to be true. Not nervous, exactly. More like scared to hope too much, you know? Mark did know. The past month had taught him that life could change instantly, for better or worse, and the fear of losing their newfound stability was always lurking in the back of his mind. But as they pulled into the parking lot of Pine Grove Apartments, their new home, he felt a surge of determination to make this work. The apartment complex was modest, but well-maintained, with red brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard where the promised playground stood covered in snow. Linda Foster was waiting for them in the leasing office, keys in hand and a warm smile on her face. "Welcome home," she said simply, handing Mark the keys to apartment 2B. Their new place felt enormous after weeks of living in a single room and a storage shed. Riley walked from room to room in wonder, her hands trailing along the walls as if she couldn't quite believe they were real. The kitchen had actual counter space, the living room had windows that let in natural light, and the bedrooms, their bedrooms, had real closets and enough space for furniture. "Emma's going to love this," Riley said, standing in the smaller bedroom that would become Emma's sanctuary. "She can finally unpack all her books." Mark joined her in the doorway, picturing Emma's drawings taped to the walls, her desk positioned near the window, her stuffed animals arranged on proper shelves instead of stored in boxes. "She's going to flip when she sees it." They spent the morning moving their modest collection of belongings from various storage locations around town. Mark had managed to save some furniture from their old apartment by storing it with Pete, while Riley's few possessions filled barely 2 boxes. But as they arranged things in their new space, it began to feel like a real home rather than just shelter. Riley was arranging books on the living room shelves when she suddenly stopped, one hand pressed to her belly, a strange expression crossing her face. "What's wrong?" Mark asked immediately, dropping the lamp he'd been positioning. "I don't know, something feels different." Riley sat down carefully on their second-hand couch, breathing slowly. Not painful, just different. Mark's protective instincts kicked into high gear. Different how? "Should we call Dr. Martinez? Maybe I just overdid it with the moving. Let me sit for a few minutes and see how I feel." But 20 minutes later, Riley was still uncomfortable, shifting positions frequently and wincing occasionally. Mark made the decision to drive her to the medical center, leaving a note for Emma in case she came home from school early. The emergency room at Millbrook Medical was busy with weather-related accidents from the snowstorm, but Riley's pregnancy status moved her quickly through triage. Dr. Martinez arrived within an hour, her calm professionalism immediately easing both Mark and Riley's anxiety. "Let's take a look and see what's going on," she said, setting up the ultrasound equipment with practiced efficiency. Mark stood awkwardly by the door until Riley reached for his hand. "Please stay. I'm scared." The ultrasound screen flickered to life, revealing the shadowy outline of Riley's baby girl moving restlessly in the womb. Dr. Martinez examined the images carefully, checking measurements and heart rate, while Riley squeezed Mark's hand tight enough to cut off circulation. "Well, everything looks normal," Dr. Martinez announced finally. "Baby's heart rate is good, measurements are on track, and there's no sign of any complications." "Then why do I feel so strange?" "You're experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions." "Practice." "Contractions. They're normal at your stage of pregnancy, but they can be triggered by stress, dehydration, or overexertion. Dr. Martinez looked at them both seriously. Have you been under any unusual stress lately? Mark and Riley exchanged glances. We just moved today, Riley admitted, into our first real home in over a month. Dr. Martinez's expression softened. With understanding. Moving is one of life's major stresses, and your body is responding to that. The contractions should ease up as you settle in, but I want you on modified bed rest for the next few days. Light activity only, plenty of fluids, and don't hesitate to call if anything changes. As they drove home through the continuing snowfall, Riley was quiet, staring out the window at their new neighborhood. Mark could sense she was processing more than just the medical scare. "Penny for your thoughts," he said gently. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Riley admitted. "Every time things start to feel stable, I expect the other shoe to drop. Today, when I felt those contractions, my first thought was that I was going to lose the baby and mess everything up for you and Emma." Mark pulled into their parking space and turned to face her. "Riley, listen to me. Nothing you could do would mess things up for us. We're a family now, which means we face whatever comes together, good or bad." "But what if—" "No what ifs," Mark interrupted firmly. "What if the baby is healthy? What if you graduate on time? What if we build something amazing together? You can drive yourself crazy with worst-case scenarios, or you can focus on making the best-case scenarios happen." Riley managed a small smile. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the time a brave 17-year-old showed up at my door and reminded me what courage looks like." Emma's reaction to their new home was everything Mark had hoped for and more. She burst through the front door like a tiny hurricane, dropping her backpack and racing from room to room, her excited squeals echoing off the walls. "This is amazing," she shouted, spinning in circles in the living room. "Look how much space we have. And Riley, your room is so pretty, and I can see the playground from my window." Riley, who was resting on the couch per doctor's orders, grinned at Emma's enthusiasm. "What do you think of the kitchen?" Emma disappeared into the kitchen and emerged a moment later with her arms spread wide. "It's huge! We can cook real dinners now, not just pancakes and mac and cheese." "Speaking of dinner," Mark said, "how do you feel about ordering pizza to celebrate our first night in the new place? Can we eat it in the living room and pretend we're having a picnic?" Emma asked. "I think that sounds perfect," Riley said, shifting to make room for Emma on the couch. As they waited for the pizza delivery, Emma gave them a detailed account of her day at school, including a dramatic retelling of how the snow had caused chaos during recess, and how her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had let them watch a movie instead of doing math. "Oh, and I told Jessica about the baby," Emma announced casually. "She wants to know if she can come over and help name her." Mark and Riley exchanged amused glances. "Emma, we can't let Jessica name the baby," Mark explained. "Why not?" "She's really good at names. She named her hamster Sir Fluffy McWhiskers." "While that's a very creative name for a hamster," Riley said diplomatically, "I think the baby's parents should probably choose her name." Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "But you're the baby's mommy, and Daddy's like her daddy now too, right? So you get to choose together?" The innocent question hung in the air like a challenge. Riley looked at Mark uncertainly, clearly, unsure how to navigate the complex reality of their situation. "Riley is the baby's mommy," Mark said carefully. "And I'm someone who cares about both of them very much. Whatever Riley decides about names is fine with me." "But you should help," Emma insisted with 6-year-old logic, "because we're a family, and families make important decisions together." Over dinner, Emma lobbied enthusiastically for various baby names, ranging from the practical, "Sarah, like my mommy," to the fantastical, "Princess Sparkle Rainbow." Riley listened with good humor, occasionally catching Mark's eye across their Makeshift picnic set up on the living room floor. What about grace? Riley suggested when Emma paused for breath. It means thankfulness and elegance. I like that, Emma said thoughtfully. Grace, that's a pretty name, and she should have a middle name too. What would you suggest for a middle name? Mark asked. Emma considered this seriously. Hope, because she's bringing us hope, right? Grace. Hope. Riley's eyes filled with tears. Grace Hope. That's beautiful, Emma. Is that really going to be her name? Emma asked excitedly. Riley looked at Mark, seeking some kind of confirmation or permission. If you think it's right, Mark said softly. Grace Hope sounds perfect to me. Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in her new bedroom, surrounded by boxes but content in her own space, Mark and Riley sat on the couch talking quietly. The apartment felt peaceful in a way that their previous living situations hadn't, safe and private and theirs. I can't believe Emma came up with that name, Riley said, one hand resting on her belly. Grace Hope, it's exactly right. She has good instincts about people, about what they need to hear. Riley was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind all evening. Mark, what happens after Grace is born? I mean, really, we've been so focused on getting stable and preparing for the baby, but what happens when she's actually here? Mark had been wondering the same thing. What do you mean exactly? I mean, legally, practically everything. You're not her father, but Emma keeps talking about you like you will be. I want you to be involved in her life. I can't imagine raising her without you, but I don't know how that works. It was a conversation they'd been avoiding, perhaps because the reality of their situation was complicated in ways that traditional families didn't have to navigate. Mark was essentially going to be a step-parent to a child who wasn't technically his, in a relationship that wasn't romantic, but was deeper than friendship. We'll figure it out as we go, Mark said finally. The important thing is that Grace grows up knowing she's wanted and loved by all of us. The legal details can be worked out later. I want you to be on her birth certificate, Riley said suddenly, as her father, if you're willing. Mark stared at her, surprised by the offer and the emotions it stirred up. Riley, that's a huge decision. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. You've done more for me and this baby in 2 months than her biological father did in the entire time I knew him. If anyone deserves to be called her father, it's you. The weight of the responsibility and the honor settled over Mark like a warm blanket. He thought about Emma's excitement over her future sister, about the nursery they'd set up in Riley's room, about all the ways Grace Hope would grow up surrounded by love and protection. I'd be honored, he said quietly, but only if you're absolutely certain. I am. We are going to be her family, all of us. She should have that reflected legally too. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their new neighborhood in pristine white. Inside apartment 2B, 3 people who'd found each other in their darkest moments sat planning for a future that felt bright with possibility. Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom, talking in her sleep about baby Grace and all, the things she was going to teach her. Riley smiled, settling back against the couch cushions with a contentment she hadn't felt since before her pregnancy began. I think we're really going to make this work, she said softly. Mark looked around their new home, at the baby clothes. They'd started collecting, at Emma's artwork already decorating the refrigerator, at Riley glowing with health and happiness despite the day's scare. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I know we are, he replied with absolute certainty. But neither of them could anticipate that in just 3 weeks, their carefully constructed world would face its greatest challenge yet, when a figure from Riley's past would arrive with news that would threaten to destroy everything they'd built. Together, December arrived with bitter cold and unexpected news that would shake their newfound stability to its core. Mark was installing baby-proofing latches on the kitchen cabinets when Riley's phone rang, the number displaying as unknown caller. She almost ignored it. They'd been getting spam calls regularly since filling out various assistance program applications, but something made her answer. "Hello, Riley. This is Detective Patricia Novak with Millbrook Police Department. I need to speak with you about James Morrison." Riley's face went white. Mark looked up from his work, immediately sensing trouble. James Morrison, Jamie, was the baby's biological father, the 18-year-old who'd abandoned Riley when she told him about the pregnancy. "What about him?" Riley's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Morrison was arrested 3 days ago on charges of statutory rape involving 2 14-year-old girls. During questioning, he mentioned your name and claimed you could provide an alibi for some of the dates in question." Riley sank onto the couch, her free hand instinctively moving to her belly. "I haven't spoken to Jamie since September. I can't provide an alibi for anything." "That's what we suspected. But we need you to come in and give an official statement. There's something else, Ms. Chen. Mr. Morrison is claiming that your pregnancy resulted from assault, not consensual activity. He's saying you're lying about his involvement." Mark watched Riley's face cycle through shock, anger, and fear. He moved closer, ready to take the phone if she needed him to. "That's not true," Riley said firmly. "What happened between us was... It was stupid, and I regret it, but it wasn't assault. He's lying. We believe you, but we need your statement on record. Can you come in tomorrow morning? And Ms. Chen, you might want to bring a lawyer or advocate with you." After hanging up, Riley sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Mark waited, letting her process the news before offering comfort or advice. "He's trying to say he raped me to get out of the other charges," Riley finally said, her voice hollow. "He thinks if he claims I'm lying about the consensual part, it'll somehow help his case with those other girls. What do you want to do?" "I want to tell the truth. But Mark, what if this complicates things with Grace? What if it affects the birth certificate paperwork or custody or—" "Hey," Mark interrupted gently, sitting beside her on the couch. "One step at a time. First, we get through the police statement. Then we figure out what comes next." Emma appeared in the doorway, her 7-year-old intuition picking up on the tension in the room. "Is everything okay?" Riley looks upset. Mark and Riley exchanged glances. They'd been trying to shield Emma from adult complications, but their daughter was too perceptive to completely fool. "Some grown-up stuff came up that we need to handle," Mark said carefully. "Nothing that affects our family, just something Riley needs to take care of." Emma studied Riley's face with concern. "Is it about Grace? Is she okay?" "Grace is fine," Riley assured her quickly. "The baby's healthy and strong. This is about something else entirely." But Emma wasn't satisfied. She climbed onto the couch next to Riley, her small hand patting Riley's arm with the same comforting gesture she used when Mark was worried about work or bills. "Whatever it is, we'll help you fix it," Emma said with absolute confidence. "That's what families do." The simple statement brought tears to Riley's eyes. Here was a 7-year-old offering the unconditional support that the adults in Riley's life had failed to provide. The next morning, Mark took a personal day from work to accompany Riley to the police station. Linda Foster had connected them with a victim's advocate named Sarah Jennings. The irony of the name wasn't lost on Mark, who met them at the station to provide support during the interview. Detective Novak turned out to be a middle-aged woman, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Riley at ease. She led them to a small conference room and explained the process before beginning her questions. "I want to be clear that you're not under investigation, Riley. We're gathering information about James Morrison's character and behavior patterns. Your statement will help us understand the full scope of his actions." Riley took a deep breath. and began to tell her story, how she'd met Jamie at a party, how he'd pursued her persistently, how their relationship had lasted 3 months before she discovered she was pregnant. "Did Mr. Morrison ever pressure you into sexual activity?" Detective Novak asked gently. "Not exactly pressure. He was persistent. He'd keep asking until I said yes, and he made me feel like saying no meant I didn't care about him. But I did say yes. It wasn't rape." "Did he ever ignore when you said no about other things?" Riley considered this carefully. "Yes, actually. He'd keep pushing about things I wasn't comfortable with, like I didn't want to skip school to hang out with him, but he'd keep asking and make me feel guilty until I gave in." Sarah Jennings made notes throughout the interview, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped Riley articulate patterns of behavior she hadn't recognized at the time. "When you told Mr. Morrison about the pregnancy, how did he respond?" Detective Novak continued. "He said it wasn't his problem and that I should take care of it. When I said I wanted to keep the baby, he got angry and said I was trying to trap him. Then he started telling people at school that he wasn't the father and that I was lying." "Has he contacted you since then?" "No. I haven't heard from him at all until you called yesterday." The interview lasted 2 hours, covering Jamie's behavior, their relationship timeline, and Riley's current situation. Detective Novak seemed particularly interested in the fact that Riley had chosen to keep the baby and build a stable home environment. 1. "Final question," Detective Novak said as they wrapped up. "Mr. Morrison claims you're an unreliable witness because you're a pregnant teenager from an unstable background. How would you respond to that characterization?" Riley straightened in her chair, and Mark saw a flash of the strength that had first impressed him when she'd shown up at their door. "I'd say that my pregnancy doesn't affect my ability to tell the truth. And as for my background, yes, I had to leave an unsafe home situation. But I've built a stable life now with people who care about me and my baby. I'm graduating high school in January, I have safe housing, and I'm planning for college." "That doesn't sound unstable to me," Detective Novak smiled approvingly. "Thank you, Riley. Your statement will be very helpful." As they left the police station, Mark felt a surge of pride in how Riley had handled herself. She'd been honest, articulate, and dignified, despite the stress of the situation. "How do you feel?" he asked as they walked to the car. "Relieved, mostly. And angry. Jamie's trying to make me part of his lies, but I'm not going to let him drag me down with him." Sarah Jennings had walked them out and overheard the comment. "Riley, I want you to know that what you did in there was brave. Speaking truth to power isn't easy, especially when someone's trying to manipulate the narrative." "What happens next?" Riley asked. "Detective Novak will include your statement in the case file. It's unlikely you'll need to testify unless this goes to trial, but your information helps establish a pattern of Morrison's behavior with young women." Driving home, Riley was quiet, processing the morning's events. Mark could see her working through something, her expression shifting from worried to thoughtful to determined. "I want to tell Emma about this," she said suddenly. Mark glanced at her in surprise. "Are you sure? She's pretty young for this kind of discussion." "Not the details, obviously, but she should know that sometimes adults make bad choices and that it's important to tell the truth, even when it's hard. She's going to hear about this somehow. Small town, you know. I'd rather she hear it from us." Mark thought about this as they pulled into their apartment complex. Emma was indeed perceptive enough to pick up on tension, and adult enough to deserve age-appropriate honesty. Okay. But we do it together, and we keep it simple. That evening, after homework was finished and dinner was cleared away, they sat Emma down for what Mark privately thought of as their first real family meeting. "Emma, remember how we told you that sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated situations?" Riley began. Emma nodded seriously, settling cross-legged on the couch between them. "Well, Today I had to talk to some police officers about someone I used to know who made some bad choices. They needed me to tell them the truth about what I knew. Did you get in trouble? Emma asked, her eyes wide with concern. No, sweetie, I wasn't in trouble. But the person I used to know is in trouble because he hurt some other people. The police needed my help to understand what really happened. Emma processed this information with the gravity she applied to all adult explanations. So you helped the police catch a bad guy? Riley smiled at the simplification. Something like that. The important thing is that I told the truth, even though it was scary and hard. Good, Emma said firmly. Telling the truth is always right. Even when it's hard. That's what Mrs. Patterson says at school. Exactly. And Emma, this doesn't change anything about our family or about Grace. It's just something that happened in the past that I needed to help clear up. Emma nodded, then surprised them both by asking, "Is the bad person Grace's daddy from before?" Mark and Riley exchanged glances. Emma's perceptiveness continued to amaze them. "Yes," Riley said simply, "but that doesn't matter now, because you and Mark are Grace's real family." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction, "because we're way better at taking care of people than a bad guy would be." Over the following weeks, the legal situation with Jamie Morrison unfolded in the background of their daily lives. Riley received periodic updates from Detective Novak, but they tried to keep the focus on preparing for Grace's arrival and Riley's upcoming graduation. Mark's construction work had evolved into a more permanent position with Pete's crew, and he'd even started taking on small residential design consultations in the evenings. The extra income allowed them to buy proper furniture for the nursery and start a small college fund for both Emma and Grace. Riley's pregnancy had progressed smoothly after the Braxton Hicks scare, and at her 8-month checkup, Dr. Martinez pronounced both mother and baby perfectly healthy. Grace was measuring slightly large for her gestational age, probably going to be tall like her dad, the doctor said with a wink at Mark, but there were no complications expected. "Dad?" Riley asked as they left the medical center after the appointment. Mark realized she was talking to him and felt a warm rush of affection and pride. "Yeah? Thank you. For everything, for taking us in, for giving Grace a real father, for making us a family." "Thank you for letting me," Mark replied. "You and Emma and Grace, you've given me something I didn't know I was missing." The conversation was interrupted by Riley's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it and her expression changed dramatically. "What is it?" Mark asked, immediately alert. Riley showed him the screen. The message was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. I know where you live now. Jamie." Mark felt ice in his veins. "When did he get out?" "I don't know. Detective Novak said his bail hearing wasn't until next week." Mark took Riley's phone and immediately called Detective Novak's number. The call went straight to voicemail, but he left an urgent message about the threatening text. "We're going home," Mark said firmly. "I'm calling in backup and we're not taking any chances." As they drove toward their apartment, Mark's mind raced through protective scenarios. Jamie Morrison had proven himself to be manipulative and potentially dangerous. The fact that he knew where they lived meant he'd been watching them, planning something. But Mark had something now that he'd never had before Sarah's death, a family to protect, and the absolute certainty that he'd do whatever it took to keep them safe. The real test of their bonds was about to begin. The threatening text from Jamie Morrison cast a shadow over what should have been one of their happiest weeks. Riley's graduation was scheduled for Friday, just 4 days away, and Grace was due in less than a month. But instead of celebrating these milestones, they found themselves looking over their shoulders and double-checking locks. Detective Novak returned Mark's call within hours, her voice tight with professional concern. "Morrison posted bail yesterday afternoon. His lawyer argued that he wasn't a flight risk because of his family ties in the community. The judge granted bail with restrictions, but apparently following you isn't specifically prohibited. "What can we do?" Mark asked, pacing their living room while Riley sat on the couch, one protective hand on her belly. "File for a restraining order. I can help expedite the paperwork given the circumstances. In the meantime, document everything. Save that text. Take photos if you see him around your building. Keep a log of any contact attempts." Mark hung up, feeling frustrated by the legal system's limitations. A piece of paper wouldn't physically protect his family, but it was better than nothing. "I'm scared," Riley admitted once Mark ended the call. "Not just for me, but for Emma and Grace. What if he tries something stupid?" "He won't get the chance," Mark said with a conviction that surprised himself. "We're not going to let fear control our lives, but we're also not going to be careless." Over the next 2 days, they established new routines designed around safety. Mark drove Emma to and from school personally instead of letting her take the bus. Riley avoided being alone either, staying home with Emma or accompanying Mark to work sites when possible. They varied their routes and schedules, making themselves harder to track. Emma, despite being shielded from the specific details, picked up on the increased tension. "Daddy, why do you keep looking out the windows?" she asked during dinner Tuesday night. Mark and Riley had discussed how much to tell her. They'd settled on honesty without unnecessary fear. "Remember how we talked about Riley helping the police with someone who made bad choices?" Mark said carefully. "Well, that person might be upset about it, so we're being extra careful for a while." Emma nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance. She applied to most adult explanations, like when there's a thunderstorm and we stay inside. Exactly like that. We're just being smart and safe. "Okay, but you'll tell me if I need to do anything special to help keep us safe, right?" Mark marveled again at his daughter's intuitive understanding of serious situations. "Absolutely. You're an important part of keeping our family safe." Wednesday brought unexpected support from an unlikely source. Pete Williams called Mark at noon with an offer that changed everything. "Hey, I've been thinking about that situation you mentioned," Pete said without preamble. "My brother-in-law owns a security company. He said he could lend you a guy for a few days, no charge. Just until the police get this sorted out." Mark was stunned by the generosity. "Pete, I can't afford—" "I said no charge. Danny owes me a favor anyway, and he's got a soft spot for families in trouble. Guy named Tony Rodriguez will swing by around 6 tonight to introduce himself." Tony Rodriguez turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 40s, built like a linebacker but with gentle eyes that immediately put Emma at ease. He explained that he'd worked 12-hour shifts, staying in his car outside their building from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. when they were most vulnerable. "I've got kids too," Tony told them as he surveyed their apartment's security features. "I know what it's like to worry about keeping them safe." That first night, knowing Tony was outside, they all slept better than they had since Jamie's text. Arrived. Riley, who'd been waking up at every small sound, managed 6 consecutive hours of sleep. Emma asked if Tony liked cookies, already planning to thank him properly. Thursday morning brought Riley's final graduation rehearsal and a phone call that would change everything again. Detective Novak's voice was grim when Mark answered. "Morrison was arrested again last night, breaking and entering at his ex-girlfriend's house. But here's the thing. He had a bag with him containing zip ties, duct tape, and what looked like a birth certificate application form with Riley's information on it." Mark felt cold fear wash over him. "What does that mean?" "It means he was planning something involving Riley and the baby. The good news is he's back in jail, and this time there won't be bail. The bad news is we found evidence he'd been tracking your family's movements for at least a week." "Tracking us how?" "Photos of your apartment building, Riley's medical appointments, Emma's school. He had a whole file, Mark. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. He'd been planning this for a while." After hanging up, Mark found himself shaking with a mixture of relief and retroactive terror. They'd been in real danger, and the only thing that had saved them was Jamie's decision to escalate his criminal behavior with someone else first. Riley took the news with surprising calm. "So it's over?" she asked simply. "His part in our story is over," Mark confirmed. "He's going to prison for a long time." "Good." Riley's hand moved to her belly, where Grace was performing her morning gymnastics routine. "I don't want her to ever have to worry about him." Friday arrived with crisp January sunshine and Riley's graduation ceremony. The small auditorium at Millbrook Community Center was decorated with blue and gold streamers, and about 30 independent study students sat in folding chairs wearing caps and gowns that had seen better days. Riley looked radiant, despite being 8.5 months pregnant, her gown tailored to accommodate her belly. She'd spent the morning getting ready with Emma's help, her hair styled in elegant waves and her makeup carefully applied. "You look beautiful," Mark told her as they took their seats in the family section. "Sarah would have loved to be here." Emma had indeed made a graduation card, complete with glitter and a drawing of Riley holding a diploma, while Grace watched from inside her belly. "Do you think Grace can hear the ceremony?" Emma whispered as the principal began his opening remarks. "I bet she can," Riley whispered back. "She's been extra active today, like she knows something special is happening." When Riley's name was called, Mark felt a surge of pride that rivaled what he'd experienced at Emma's school achievements. This young woman had faced abandonment, homelessness, and pregnancy, yet she'd still managed to complete her education early while building a stable life for herself and her baby. Riley walked across the stage with dignity, accepting her diploma, with the smile that could have powered the entire building. The small audience applauded enthusiastically, but Mark and Emma's cheers were the loudest of all. "Riley Chen," the principal announced, "graduating with highest honors and planning to attend Millbrook Community College in the fall." After the ceremony, they took photos in front of the community center, Riley posing with her diploma, while Emma beamed beside her and Mark snapped picture after picture. Other families smiled at the obvious joy and love between them, and several strangers congratulated Riley on her achievement. "I'm so proud of you," Mark told Riley as they headed to the car. "You should be proud of yourself too." "I am," Riley said, and Mark could hear the wonder in her voice. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm a high school graduate, with a family and a baby on the way, and plans for college. Sometimes I can't believe this is real." They celebrated with dinner at Emma's favorite restaurant, a family-style Italian place where the portions were huge and the atmosphere was warmly chaotic. Riley couldn't eat much because Grace was taking up most of her abdominal space, but she glowed with happiness throughout the meal. "Can we frame your diploma?" Emma asked over dessert. "Like we did with the picture of Mommy?" "I'd love that," Riley said, tears springing to her eyes at the comparison. Driving home through the January evening, Mark reflected on how much their lives had changed since that desperate October night when Riley had appeared at their door. They'd all grown, Emma into a confident big sister, Riley into a young woman ready for motherhood and college, and Mark into someone who understood that family could be chosen as well as born. "Mark," Riley said softly from the passenger seat, "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" Mark asked, immediately alert. "Nothing's wrong. I just realized I've never actually said thank you. Not really. You saved my life, mine and Grace's. You gave us a home and a family and a future. I don't know how to thank someone for that." Mark glanced in the rearview mirror, at Emma, who was dozing in her car seat, then at Riley, whose face was soft with emotion in the dashboard light. "You don't need to thank me," Mark said quietly. "You gave me something too. You gave me purpose again. You reminded me what it felt like to be needed, to be useful. You made Emma happy in a way I couldn't manage on my own. If anything, I should be thanking you." "We saved each other," Riley said simply. "Yeah, I think we did." Sunday morning brought an unexpected surprise that would mark the next chapter of their journey together. Riley woke up around 5 a.m. with what she initially thought was back pain from sleeping awkwardly. But as the discomfort intensified and began coming in regular intervals, she realized what was happening. "Mark," she said, gently shaking his shoulder. "I think it's time." Mark bolted upright, instantly alert. "Time for what? Is Grace?" "I think so. The contractions started about an hour ago, and they're getting stronger." Mark's protective instincts kicked into overdrive, but he forced himself to stay calm. They'd prepared for this moment, had a plan, knew what to do. "How far apart?" he asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd packed weeks earlier. "About 7 minutes now. Dr. Martinez said to come in when they're 5 minutes apart, or my water breaks." Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's happening? Why is everyone awake?" "Grace is ready to be born," Riley told her with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Today might be the day we get to meet her." Emma's sleepiness vanished instantly. "Really, today? Can I come to the hospital?" Mark and Riley had discussed this scenario. Emma desperately wanted to be there when Grace was born, but hospital policies and the unpredictability of labor made it complicated. "Let's see how things go," Mark said diplomatically. "First, we need to get Riley to the hospital and make sure everything's okay." Riley doubled over as another contraction hit, stronger than the previous ones. When it passed, she looked up with determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Let's go meet our daughter." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for the hospital, Mark felt the same mix of anticipation and protectiveness he'd experienced before Emma's birth. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just a father waiting for his child to be born. He was a man who'd built a family from love and choice and mutual need, and now that family was about to grow by one. Grace Hope was about to make her entrance into a world where she was already deeply loved and fiercely protected by 3 people who'd found each other when they needed it most. The last chapter of their beginning was about to unfold. The drive to Millbrook Medical Center felt both eternal and instantaneous. Riley gripped Mark's hand during each contraction, while Emma sat in the back seat, chattering nervously about whether Grace would have Riley's dark hair or Mark's brown eyes. The January morning was crisp and clear, with sunrise painting the sky, in shades of pink and gold that seemed to promise good things ahead. "This is really happening," Riley breathed as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. "In a few hours, Grace is going to be here." Mark squeezed her hand. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready since the moment I decided to keep her," Riley replied with conviction that made Mark's chest tight with pride. The labor and delivery ward buzzed with quiet efficiency, nurses moving with practiced calm as they got Riley settled. Into her room, Dr. Martinez arrived within an hour, her warm smile immediately putting everyone at ease. "Well, it looks like Grace decided she doesn't want to wait until her due date," Dr. Martinez said after examining Riley. "You're progressing beautifully. I'd estimate we'll meet this little girl sometime this afternoon." Emma had been allowed to stay during the initial evaluation, but as Riley's labor intensified, it became clear that the hospital environment was overwhelming for a 7-year-old. Mark was torn between staying with Riley and taking care of Emma until an unexpected solution presented itself. Linda Foster from Second Chance Housing arrived with coffee and a warm smile, having driven over as soon as Mark called to let her know what was happening. "I thought you might need some backup," Linda said simply. "Emma, how would you feel about coming with me to the cafeteria for a while? We could work on that baby book you mentioned and maybe find some flowers for Riley's room." Emma looked uncertain, clearly wanting to be part of everything but also visibly tired from the early morning and emotional intensity. "It's okay, sweetheart," Riley told her during a break between contractions. "Grace isn't going to be born for a while yet. You can come back when she's closer to arriving." "Promise you'll call me the very second she's born?" Emma demanded. "I promise," Mark said solemnly. "You'll be the first to know." As the morning progressed into afternoon, Riley's labor followed a steady but gradual pattern. Mark stayed by her side, holding her hand through contractions, helping her breathe through the pain and marveling at her strength. She'd been through so much in her 18 years, but nothing had prepared him for watching her bring their daughter into the world. "Tell me about when Emma was born," Riley requested during a particularly long contraction. "I want to think about something happy." Mark found himself sharing memories he'd rarely spoken about. How Sarah had insisted on walking the hospital, all until the very last moment. How Emma had been born with a full head of dark hair and an indignant cry that announced her personality from day one. How holding his daughter for the first time had made him understand what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. "That's how I feel about Grace already," Riley said softly, "like I'd do anything to protect her, even though I haven't met her yet." "That's exactly how it feels," Mark agreed. "And it only gets stronger once you see her face." Around 2 o'clock, things began to intensify rapidly. Dr. Martinez returned with the delivery team, and suddenly the room was full of purposeful activity. Emma and Linda appeared in the doorway just as the final stage of labor began. "Is it time?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide with excitement and nervousness. "Very soon now," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "Emma, you can watch from right there by the door if you want to see Grace being born." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the significance of the moment. Linda stood behind her, hands on Emma's shoulders, ready to step out if things became too intense. The next 20 minutes felt like hours and seconds simultaneously. Riley pushed with determination that left Mark in awe, her face flushed with effort, but her eyes bright with anticipation. Mark found himself coaching her through each contraction, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. "I can see." "Ahead!" Dr. Martinez announced suddenly. "Riley, on the next contraction, give me one more big push." Riley bore down with everything she had, and suddenly the room filled with the most beautiful sound in the world. Grace Hope's first cry, strong and clear and absolutely perfect. "She's here!" Emma shouted from the doorway, jumping up and down with excitement. "Grace is here!" Dr. Martinez lifted the baby, and Mark felt his world tilt on its axis. Grace was beautiful, wrinkled and red and covered in vernix, but absolutely, perfectly beautiful. She had Riley's delicate features and a head full of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, they were the deep blue that all newborns have. "Oh my God!" Riley sobbed, reaching out with trembling hands. "She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." Dr. Martinez placed Grace on Riley's chest, and the baby's cries immediately calmed as she heard her mother's voice. Mark watched, tears streaming down his face, as Riley looked at their daughter with wonder and love so pure it took his breath away. "Hello, Grace Hope," Riley whispered. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Emma crept closer, mesmerized by her new baby sister. "She's so tiny," she breathed. "And look at her little fingers," Mark found his voice finally. "Riley, she's incredible. You did amazingly." "We did this," Riley corrected, looking up at him with tears of joy. "All of us. She's ours." The next hour passed in a blur of medical procedures, measurements, and paperwork. Grace weighed 6 pounds, 12 ounces, perfect for her gestational age. She scored perfectly on all her tests. Her lungs were clear, and her heart rate was strong and steady. When the nurses finally handed Grace to Mark, properly swaddled and calm, he felt the same overwhelming surge of protective love he'd experienced. When Emma was born, But this time was different too. This time he was holding a daughter he'd chosen to love, in a family they'd built together through choice and commitment rather than just biology. "Hello, little one," Mark said softly, studying Grace's perfect features. "I'm your daddy, and I promise I'm going to love you and protect you for the rest of my life." Grace seemed to focus on his voice, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. Emma stood on her tiptoes to see better, her face glowing with big sister pride. "Can I hold her?" Emma asked quietly. Mark looked to Riley, who nodded with a smile. They carefully positioned Emma in the bedside chair and placed Grace in her arms, supporting the baby's head and neck. "She's so warm," Emma marveled. "And she smells like new baby smell. It's the best smell in the world." Watching Emma hold Grace, Mark felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Their family was whole now. Not the family he'd originally planned, but the family they'd chosen and built and fought for together. Dr. Martinez finished her paperwork and approached with the birth certificate forms. "I understand Mr. Henderson will be listed as the father?" "Yes," Riley said firmly. "Mark is Grace's father in every way that matters." Mark signed the birth certificate with hands that shook slightly from emotion. Grace Hope Henderson. It made everything official. She was legally his daughter, part of their family, not just by love, but by law. As evening fell, their small hospital room filled with quiet joy. Riley rested while Grace slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed. Emma had curled up in the chair next to Mark, exhausted from the emotional day, but refusing to leave until visiting hours ended. "Daddy," Emma said sleepily, "Grace is the best present ever." "She really is," Mark agreed, watching his youngest daughter sleep. "Are we going to be okay now? All of us together?" Mark thought about everything they'd been through, the evictions and homelessness, the threats from Jamie Morrison, the uncertainty and fear, and moments when everything seemed impossible. Then he looked around their hospital room at Riley glowing with new motherhood, at Grace sleeping peacefully, at Emma fighting sleep because she didn't want to miss a moment of being a big sister. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay, we're going to be happy." 2 days later, they brought Grace home to Pine Grove Apartments, where balloons and a Welcome Home Grace banner waited on their door. Emma had insisted on helping decorate, and she'd recruited several neighbors in the process. Mrs. Patterson had stopped by with a casserole, and Pete Williams had delivered a beautiful handmade cradle he'd crafted in his workshop. "I can't believe how many people care about us," Riley said, as they settled Grace into her nursery for the first time. "That's what happens when you let people in," Mark replied, "when you build real relationships and community." The first few weeks with a newborn were exactly as challenging as Mark remembered from Emma's infancy, but they faced it together. Riley proved to be a natural mother, intuitive and patient even during Grace's fussiest moments. Emma embraced her big sister role with enthusiasm, helping with diaper changes and bottle feedings, and reading stories to Grace during her alert periods. Mark found himself amazed by how seamlessly Grace fit into their lives. She was a calm baby, sleeping well and crying only when she needed something specific. During her quiet, alert times, she seemed to study their faces with intense concentration, as if memorizing the people who loved her. 1 month after Grace's birth, on a sunny February morning, Mark received a call that would mark the beginning of their next chapter. The caller was David Chen, Riley's estranged father, who had somehow tracked them down despite Riley's mother's refusal to share contact information. "Riley, this is your father. I know we haven't spoken since you left, but I need you to know that I never agreed with how your mother and stepfather treated you." Riley's face went through a complicated series of emotions as she listened to her father's voice for the first time in months. "I've been trying to find you since I heard about the baby," David continued. "I want to meet my granddaughter, if you'll let me. and I want to apologize for not standing up for you when you needed me." After a long conversation, Riley agreed to meet her father at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where Mark could be nearby for support. The reunion was tentative but emotional, with David breaking down as he met Grace for the first time. "She's beautiful," he said, tears streaming down his face. "And you look happy, Riley, really happy." "I am happy," Riley replied, "happier than I've ever been." David's return to their lives brought unexpected benefits. He offered to help with college expenses and proved to be a devoted grandfather who visited regularly and babysat when Mark and Riley needed time to themselves. More importantly, he provided Riley with the parental approval and love she'd been missing for so long. 6 months after Grace's birth, Riley started classes at Millbrook Community College, studying early childhood education with plans to transfer to a 4-year university. Mark's architectural consulting business had grown enough that he was considering renting office space and hiring an assistant. Emma had thrived as a big sister, showing Grace how to grasp toys, reading her picture books, and announcing to anyone who would listen that she had the smartest baby sister in the world. On a warm August evening, as they sat on their small balcony watching Emma push Grace in her stroller around the courtyard, Riley turned to Mark with a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that night?" Mark considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I think you would have found a way to survive and build a good life for Grace. You're stronger than you know." "What about you? Do you think you and Emma would have been okay?" "We would have survived," Mark said honestly. "But we wouldn't have been complete. You and Grace didn't just join our family. You made us into the family we were supposed to be." Riley smiled, watching Emma carefully guide Grace's stroller around a small bump in the sidewalk. "I used to think family was just the people you were born to, but this is better. This is family you choose, family you build together." As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a desperate single father facing eviction and failure. Riley had been a scared pregnant teenager with nowhere to turn. Emma had been a little girl trying to be brave while her world felt uncertain. Now they were a family in the truest sense. Not perfect, not without challenges, but complete and committed to each other through whatever came next. Grace babbled happily from her stroller, reaching up toward the colorful sky with tiny fingers that would one day grow strong enough to build dreams of her own. Emma pointed out birds and clouds, already teaching her sister about the world with the patience and love she'd learned from the adults who'd chosen to build this unconventional, beautiful family together. Sometimes the most important families aren't born. They're found in moments of desperation that become opportunities for love. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the biggest challenges. And sometimes, when you open your door to help someone else, you discover that you're the one who needed saving. In apartment 2B at Pine Grove, the Henderson family, all 4 of them, settled in for another peaceful evening together, grateful for the journey that had brought them home to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.